I grew up believing my family was ordinary, the kind of ordinary that blends into the background of any small American town, where people wave politely but never ask real questions. My childhood memories were simple ones: my mother humming while folding laundry, my father coming home late with tired eyes, dinners eaten quietly at a table that always felt a little too big for the three of us. Nothing ever felt missing, yet something always felt unspoken, like a door in the house that no one ever opened. My older sister, Claire, was 5 years ahead of me and a world apart. She was confident in a way I never was, loud where I was quiet, demanding where I learned to accept. She left home at 18 and never really came back. College turned into a career, the career turned into money, and the money turned into a life I only saw through social media photos and holiday visits. She always smelled like expensive perfume and certainty. I stayed. I stayed in our town, stayed near our parents, stayed small without meaning to. I worked, paid rent, tried to build something stable out of an income that never quite stretched far enough. I told myself I was content, that not everyone needed ambition that burned like fire, but sometimes late at night, lying awake in my tiny apartment, I wondered if I had chosen this life or if it had simply happened to me. The first crack in everything appeared on a rainy Sunday afternoon when my mother called and asked us both to come over for dinner. It sounded casual, routine, the kind of invitation that carried no warning. I almost declined because I had deadlines to meet, but something in her voice felt heavier than usual, so I went. Claire arrived first. I could tell by the unfamiliar luxury car parked in the driveway, sleek and out of place like it didn't belong in our quiet neighborhood. When I walked in, she was already laughing with my father, wine glass in hand, perfectly at ease as if she had never left. She hugged me quickly, her smile warm but distant, like she was hugging a memory rather than a person. Dinner started politely enough. We talked about work, weather, nothing important. Then Claire leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine, and said it casually, almost jokingly. "So," she said, "how does it feel knowing you're sitting on more money than I'll probably ever see?" I frowned. "What are you talking about?" She raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Don't play dumb. The trust fund. Mom and Dad told me years ago. $600,000, right? I always wondered why you never did anything big with it." The room went quiet in a way that made my ears ring. I laughed once, a short, confused sound. "Claire, I don't have a trust fund." Her smile faded slowly. "Very funny." "I'm serious," I said. "I don't know what you're talking about." My mother froze, fork halfway to her mouth. My father stared down at his plate like it had suddenly become very interesting. My chest tightened. "Mom?" I said softly. "Dad?" My mother cleared her throat. "Claire, maybe this isn't the time." Claire sat forward, confusion turning into irritation. "Wait, are you telling me you didn't know? They set it up for you before you turned 18. They told me they wanted things to be fair." Fair. The word hit me harder than anything else. "I pay my own rent," I said quietly. "I work 2 jobs sometimes. I don't have $600,000. I don't even have 6,000. Silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. My father finally spoke, his voice low. "The trust was complicated." I pushed my chair back and stood up, hands shaking. "I need some air." Outside, rain drizzled softly, soaking into my jacket as if trying to cool the fire rising inside me. I called my mother from the driveway, even though she was only a few feet away inside the house. My voice broke the moment she answered. "Mom?" I said. "Tell me the truth, please." There was a long pause. "We planned it," she admitted quietly. "The trust. But we never funded it. We thought it would motivate you, teach you independence." I laughed bitterly. By letting my sister believe I was secretly rich while I struggled? "We didn't think it would matter," she whispered. "We didn't think it would come up." But it had, and now everything I thought I understood about my family felt tilted, unstable. When I went back inside, Claire was standing near the window, arms crossed. She looked at me with something I had never seen before. Not anger, not pity, but suspicion. "So what?" she said. "You're saying you just lived poor by choice?" "No," I said. "I lived the life I was given." Her jaw tightened. Unbelievable. She grabbed her coat and left without another word, the door slamming behind her hard enough to rattle the walls. My parents didn't stop her. They didn't stop me either when I followed, driving home silently, rain streaking across my windshield like tears I refused to shed. That night, sleep wouldn't come. My mind replayed every holiday, every sideways comment Claire had ever made about my easy life. Every time she had assumed I was lazy, unmotivated, privileged, and I wondered how many times my parents had listened without correcting her. I didn't know then that this was only the beginning. That one misunderstanding, buried under years of silence, was about to unravel secrets far bigger than money. Secrets about love, betrayal, and a choice my parents made long before I was old enough to understand it. And once the truth finally surfaced, none of us would ever be the same again.
The next morning, I woke up with the strange feeling that something permanent had shifted, like waking after an earthquake and realizing the walls were still standing, but the foundation underneath had cracked. My phone was silent. No message from Claire, no apology from my parents, just the quiet hum of my refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside my window, reminding me that life, somehow, was still moving forward. I went to work, but my hands moved automatically while my mind stayed behind at that dinner table. Every design I opened on my screen blurred together. All I could hear was Claire's voice saying the word fair, as if fairness were something tangible that could be measured and distributed evenly, like money in an envelope. By lunchtime, I couldn't take it anymore. I texted my mother. "We need to talk. All of it. No more half-truths." Her reply came a few minutes later. "Come over tonight. Your father and I owe you that." When I arrived, the house felt heavier than it ever had. The walls seemed closer, the air thick with things that had been swallowed instead of spoken. My mother sat on the couch, hands folded tightly in her lap. My father stood by the window, staring out at the yard like he was bracing himself for a storm. "We never meant to hurt you," my mother began, tears already forming. "We thought we were helping." "Helping who?" I asked quietly. They exchanged a look, one filled with a history I wasn't part of. "Claire," my father said, "and you." I sat down slowly. "Start from the beginning." They did, and with every sentence, the story of my life shifted further from what I thought it was. Claire, it turned out, had been a difficult child. Brilliant, yes, but restless, angry, always pushing against rules. By 16, she was skipping school, getting into trouble, testing boundaries. My parents were terrified she'd throw her future away. When she finally got accepted into college, they poured everything they had into keeping her there: tuition, housing, support, second chances. By the time I was born, they were already exhausted, financially strained, emotionally worn down. "You were different," my mother said softly. "You were calm, responsible. You didn't ask for much." "So you gave me less," I said. Not accusing, just stating. "We thought you didn't need as much," she whispered. The trust fund idea came from guilt, my father admitted, a way to promise themselves they'd make things equal someday. But someday never came. Bills came instead, emergencies, life. "And Claire?" I asked. "Why did you let her believe it was real?" My father looked down. "Because she needed to believe you had a safety net. It made her feel less alone carrying the pressure of success." I stared at them, disbelief slowly turning into something sharper. So my struggle was the price of her comfort? "No," my mother cried. "We didn't see it that way." But that didn't change the truth. That night, Claire finally called. Her voice was cold. "So you really didn't know?" "No," I said. "I didn't." There was a pause. "Then what have you been doing all these years?" Surviving, same as you, just without applause. She scoffed. Don't act like a victim. You stayed close to home. You had mom and dad. And you had their money, I said quietly, and their expectations. Silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. I thought you were lucky, she finally said, her voice lower now. I thought you were secretly safe, that if everything fell apart for me, at least you'd be okay. I swallowed. I wasn't. Something shifted then. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the first crack in the story she had told herself about me. Weeks passed with little contact. Holidays came and went quietly. My parents tried harder, calling more, offering help they had never offered before. But something inside me resisted accepting it, not out of pride, but out of fear. Fear that help always came with conditions I didn't understand until it was too late. Then one evening, Claire showed up at my apartment unannounced. She looked different, tired, less polished. The confidence she usually wore like armor had cracks in it. I lost my job, she said simply. I stepped aside and let her in. She sat at my small kitchen table, staring at the chipped surface like it held answers. The company downsized, no warning, no safety net. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. I don't know how you've done this, she admitted, living like this, not knowing if next month will be okay. I made tea, the same cheap brand I'd always bought. You learn, or you don't, and then you learn. She looked up at me, eyes shining. I'm scared. For the first time in my life, my sister sounded like she needed me. And in that moment, I realized the trust fund was never really about money. It was about who was allowed to feel safe and who was expected to be strong without support. What neither of us knew yet was that our parents still had one last secret left to tell, one decision they had never told either of us about. And when it finally came to light, it would force all of us to confront the cost of the choices we made in the name of love. Claire stayed that night, sleeping on my couch because she said being alone felt unbearable. I lay awake in my bedroom, listening to the soft sounds of her breathing from the other room, wondering when the roles between us had quietly reversed. All my life I had believed she was the strong one, the successful one, the protected one. Yet here she was, stripped of certainty, sitting inside the life she once judged without ever understanding. The next morning we drank coffee in silence. The sun came through the small window above my sink, highlighting every crack in the walls, every sign of wear I had grown used to ignoring. Claire noticed everything. "How long have you lived like this?" she asked. "Years," I said. "Long enough that it feels normal." She nodded slowly, as if committing that word to memory. Normal. She didn't leave right away. One day turned into 3. She helped me cook dinner, asked about my work, listened when I talked about clients who paid late and projects that barely covered rent. She didn't interrupt or judge. She just listened. And with every passing hour, something fragile but real began to grow between us, an understanding that couldn't have existed before everything broke open. On the 4th day, our father called. "I need you both to come over," he said. "Tonight." His voice carried a weight I recognized now, the sound of a truth that had been postponed too long. When we arrived, our parents were seated side by side on the couch, hands intertwined like they were bracing themselves. There was a folder on the coffee table between them, worn at the edges. "This should have been told years ago," my father said. "We were cowards." My mother wiped her eyes. "We thought we were protecting you both." Claire crossed her arms. "From what?" "From the truth. Before I was born, before the trust fund, before the promises of fairness, my parents had made a choice that changed everything. A medical diagnosis, a prognosis, a fear so deep it reshaped how they loved us. I had been born premature. Complications followed. Doctors warned my parents that I might not live past childhood, and if I did, they said, I might never be fully independent. So we planned, my mother whispered. We planned for the worst.
The trust fund wasn't meant to be motivation, it was meant to be protection, a future where I wouldn't suffer if they were gone. But then you grew, my father said. You became strong, capable, independent, and we didn't know how to let go of the fear. They shifted their focus to Claire and said, her success felt urgent, necessary. She needed to be stable, secure, able to carry responsibility, because in their minds, one day she might have to take care of me. Claire's face went pale. You never told me that. We didn't want to burden you, my mother said. I felt something collapse inside my chest. My entire life had been shaped by a future that never came, by a version of me that no longer existed, or maybe never had. So you let her believe I was rich, I said quietly. You let me believe I was alone. Tears streamed freely now. We were wrong, my father said, about so much. The folder on the table contained paperwork, updated documents, a real trust fund this time, modest but real, something they had recently finalized after realizing how badly they had failed both of us. Claire pushed the folder away. This doesn't fix anything. She stood up, pacing. You raised me to succeed because you were afraid, and you raised them to struggle because you thought they could handle it. Do you have any idea what that does to people? No one answered. I spent my whole life believing I had to be perfect because if I failed, everything would fall apart. She looked at me then, eyes filled with regret. I resented you for something that was never real. I stood slowly, my legs shaking. I don't want the money, I said. I want honesty. I want to stop being the silent solution to a problem no one talked about. The room was quiet except for soft crying. It didn't end that night. Healing never does. But something shifted. Not neatly, not cleanly, just enough to let light in. In the weeks that followed, Claire stayed close. She took temporary work, learned how to live without the safety she once assumed was always there. Our parents tried, awkwardly, to rebuild trust one conversation at a time. And I learned something unexpected about myself. I wasn't strong because I had to be. I was strong because I chose to be. But life wasn't finished testing that strength yet, because just when things began to settle, another truth surfaced, one that had nothing to do with money or childhood fears. A letter arrived in the mail, addressed to me, written by someone I had never heard of, and the name at the bottom would change everything I believed about where I came from. The letter sat on my kitchen table for hours before I opened it. The envelope was plain, the handwriting unfamiliar, careful, like someone afraid of being recognized. I kept walking past it, telling myself it could wait, that nothing inside could possibly matter more than everything already unraveling in my life. But I knew that wasn't true. I felt it in my chest, a quiet pressure that refused to leave. When I finally tore it open, my hands were shaking. It began simply, my name, an apology, then a sentence that made the room tilt around me. I am not who you think you are. I read it again, slower this time, my breath shallow. The writer explained that they had waited years to reach out, that fear and guilt had kept them silent, that they didn't know if I would even want to know the truth. The words felt heavy, deliberate, as if each one had been tested before being placed on the page. They claimed to be my biological parent. Not my mother, not my father. Someone else. I sat down hard in the chair, my mind racing to catch up with my body. My parents had never mentioned adoption, never hinted at it. There were no stories, no awkward pauses, nothing that suggested my origins were anything other than what I had always believed. The letter continued. I had been born to a young woman who couldn't keep me. She loved me, the letter said, but love hadn't been enough to give me the life I deserved. My parents had stepped in quietly, privately. No agencies, no official records anyone talked about. Just a promise made in a hospital room under harsh fluorescent lights. They agreed never to tell me.
I folded the letter slowly, my thoughts splintering. Every memory suddenly felt unstable, like it might collapse under closer inspection. My mother's overprotectiveness, my father's distance, their fear, their planning for a future where I might not survive or might not thrive. Had they known something about me even I didn't? When they came over that evening, I handed them the letter without a word. My mother's face drained of color as she read. My father closed his eyes before he even reached the end, like he had known this moment would come eventually. "You promised," my mother whispered. "I didn't send it," my father said quickly. "I swear." They sat down across from me, their silence louder than any confession. "It's true," my mother finally said. "We adopted you. At birth." The word landed softly, but it echoed endlessly. "We loved you from the moment we held you. Nothing about that was a lie," she continued, tears streaming. "But you let me believe my entire life was built on one version of the truth." "We were afraid," my father said. "Afraid you'd feel unwanted. Afraid you'd leave." I almost laughed at that. Leave? I had never felt like I belonged anywhere enough to leave it. Claire arrived later, breathless, having sensed something was wrong. She read the letter, then looked at me with a mixture of shock and tenderness I had never seen in her eyes before. "This explains so much," she said softly, and she was right. It did. The fear, the pressure, the imbalance, the way love had been rationed instead of shared freely, the way I had been raised to be resilient instead of cherished, while she had been raised to succeed instead of rest. None of it excused the pain, but it gave it context. I asked about my biological mother, where she was, why now. "She's sick," my mother admitted quietly. "She reached out to us first. We told her no. We told her you didn't need disruption." I clenched my jaw. "You don't get to decide that anymore." The next week was a blur of emotions I didn't know how to name. Anger, curiosity, fear, hope. I carried them all like fragile glass, afraid that if I set them down, they would shatter. Eventually, I agreed to meet her. The cafe was small and quiet. She sat near the window, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. She looked ordinary, and somehow that made it harder. When she saw me, her breath caught. She stood, then stopped, unsure if she was allowed to move closer. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, "for everything." I studied her face, searching for myself in it, my eyes, my hands, some small, familiar shape. "I didn't come for apologies," I said gently. "I came for truth." She nodded, tears slipping free, and she told me everything. The fear, the choice, the regret that never left, the relief when she knew I was safe, loved, alive. When we parted, nothing felt resolved, but something felt acknowledged, and that mattered more than closure. As I walked home, the city felt different, like I was seeing it through new eyes, not lost, not found, just becoming. I realized then that identity isn't a single story handed to you at birth. It's something you build from every truth you survive. But the final test was still ahead, because the choices I would make next would determine whether this story ended in healing or in silence. After meeting her, I didn't tell anyone for days. Not my parents, not Claire, not even myself, if I'm being honest. I moved through my routines like a ghost, answering emails, buying groceries, smiling at strangers, all while carrying a truth that felt too big to fit inside my body. I had always believed I was someone who understood their place in the world. Now I realized I had been standing on a map with half the roads erased. My biological mother didn't call or text. She had promised she wouldn't unless I asked. That restraint, that respect, confused me more than desperation would have. It forced me to decide what I wanted instead of reacting to what someone else needed. Claire noticed first. She always did, even when she pretended not to care. "You're somewhere else," she said one night, as we sat on my couch, the room dim except for the glow of a single lamp. And before you say you're fine, don't. I know what fine looks like on you. I told her everything, slowly, carefully, watching her face change with each sentence. When I finished, she didn't speak right away. She just reached over and took my hand. You don't have to choose, she said finally. You're allowed to be more than one thing. Her words settled into me quietly, like they were meant to be there all along. Our parents struggled more. My mother oscillated between guilt and fear, hovering too close one moment and pulling away the next. My father grew quieter, his apologies fewer but heavier, as if he understood that words alone couldn't undo years of silence. I don't want to lose you, my mother said one evening, voice trembling. You already did, I answered gently, for a while, but we're here now. That has to count for something. The real turning point came months later, unexpectedly, during a phone call that started ordinary and ended with everything changing again. My biological mother was getting worse. The illness she had mentioned was no longer abstract. She didn't say it directly, but I heard it in the pauses between her words, in the way she asked questions about my life, like she was trying to memorize it. I went to see her again. This time I stayed longer. We talked about small things, music, food, the weather. She didn't try to claim me. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just existed with me in the same space, like that alone was a gift. When she reached for my hand, I didn't pull away. Love, I learned, doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits quietly, hoping you'll notice. After she passed, the grief surprised me. It wasn't sharp or overwhelming. It was soft, persistent, like a low hum that followed me everywhere. I mourned not just her, but the version of myself I might have been if things had been different. And then I let that go too. At the memorial, my parents stood beside me, not in front, not behind, just there. Claire squeezed my shoulder when I faltered. For the first time, I felt like my story wasn't something I had to protect or explain. It simply was. Life didn't magically become easier after that. Bills still came, work still stressed me out. Some nights I still lay awake wondering who I was becoming, but the weight I carried felt different now, lighter, chosen. I started saying no when I needed to, asking for help when I didn't know the answer, letting myself want things without apologizing for it. Claire found her footing again, too. A new job, a slower pace, a version of success that didn't demand she sacrifice herself to earn it. We talked more honestly than we ever had before, about jealousy, resentment, love, and the strange ways families try to survive. Our parents changed in quieter ways. Less control, more listening, fewer assumptions. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. One evening, sitting alone in my apartment, I realized something that stopped me cold. I had spent my whole life thinking strength meant enduring quietly. But real strength, I learned, was allowing myself to be seen. My story didn't begin with a trust fund. It didn't end with answers neatly tied up. It became something better, something true. And for the first time, that felt like enough. Time didn't heal everything, but it gave me space to breathe inside my own life. The months after the memorial passed quietly, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, but thoughtful. I stopped rushing through my days. I stopped measuring myself against invisible standards I had never agreed to. For the first time, I wasn't trying to prove that I deserved the life I had. I was simply living it. I moved out of the apartment above the bookstore into a slightly bigger place across town. Nothing fancy, just more light, more room to think. When I signed the lease, my hands didn't shake the way they used to. I didn't feel like I was borrowing stability anymore. I felt like I had earned it. Claire visited often. Sometimes we talked for hours. Sometimes we sat in silence, comfortable in a way we had never been before. One evening, while washing dishes together, she said something that stayed with me. "I spent my whole life running," she said quietly, "and you were standing still. I thought that meant you were behind. Now I realize you were just rooted." I smiled at that. Rooted. It felt right. Our parents adjusted slowly. They no longer tried to fix things with money or plans. They asked questions instead, real ones, about my work, my fears, my hopes. They listened without interrupting, and when they apologized, it wasn't frantic or defensive anymore. It was calm, honest. One afternoon, my father handed me an old photo album. Inside were pictures I had never seen. Hospital rooms, nurses smiling tired smiles, my parents holding me like I was something fragile and miraculous. "We were so afraid," he said. "We forgot to be brave." I held the album close, feeling a strange warmth in my chest. Fear didn't erase love, it distorted it. And now, slowly, we were learning how to love without fear. Then life did what it always does. It tested the lessons I thought I had learned. A new opportunity came unexpectedly, a job offer from another state, better pay, creative freedom, a chance to build something meaningful. It was the kind of opportunity people wait years for. Old instincts flared, the urge to stay, to choose safety, to not disrupt the fragile peace I had worked so hard to create. I told Claire first. "You should go," she said immediately. "What if everything falls apart again?" I asked. She smiled softly. "Then you'll survive it. You always do. The difference now is that you won't be alone." Telling my parents was harder. My mother cried, but she didn't try to stop me. My father hugged me longer than usual. "We raised you to be strong, even when we didn't understand what that meant." I held the album close, feeling a strange warmth in my chest. Fear didn't erase love, it distorted it. And now, slowly, we were learning how to love without fear. Then life did what it always does. It tested the lessons I thought I had learned. A new opportunity came unexpectedly, a job offer from another state, better pay, creative freedom, a chance to build something meaningful. It was the kind of opportunity people wait years for. Old instincts flared, the urge to stay, to choose safety, to not disrupt the fragile peace I had worked so hard to create. I told Claire first. "You should go," she said immediately. "What if everything falls apart again?" I asked. She smiled softly. "Then you'll survive it. You always do. The difference now is that you won't be alone." Telling my parents was harder. My mother cried, but she didn't try to stop me. My father hugged me longer than usual. "We raised you to be strong, even when we didn't understand what that meant." The move wasn't dramatic. No big speeches, no perfect goodbyes. Just boxes, long drives, and the quiet excitement of starting over somewhere new. In the new city, I felt invisible at first, and then, slowly, I felt free. I made friends who didn't know my history, who didn't see me as the quiet one or the responsible one or the one who could handle anything. They just saw me as I was, as I chose to be. I fell in love, too. Not the loud, consuming kind I had always imagined, but something steady, patient, the kind of love that asks who you are becoming and listens to the answer. One night, lying awake beside someone who knew my whole story and didn't flinch, I realized something profound. The truth hadn't broken me. It had built me. I was no longer defined by secrets kept for me or decisions made without me. I was defined by the choices I made once I finally knew. And as the years passed, the story kept unfolding, not perfectly, not easily, but honestly, which I learned was the only ending that ever really mattered. Years have a quiet way of revealing what moments cannot. They don't rush you toward understanding. They let you live with your choices long enough to see who you become because of them. In the years after I moved, my life didn't turn extraordinary in the ways people usually imagine. There were no sudden transformations that made good stories easier to tell. Instead, there was consistency, growth that didn't announce itself, healing that didn't demand applause. I built a rhythm, work that challenged me without consuming me, relationships that felt mutual instead of heavy. I learned how to rest without guilt and how to want things without justifying them. Those lessons came slowly, layered over time, reinforced by moments both small and significant. Claire changed too. She moved closer to me eventually, not because she needed help, but because she wanted connection. We began meeting for long walks, talking about the versions of ourselves we had outgrown. She admitted things she had never said out loud before: the resentment, the fear of failure, the way success had felt less like achievement and more like survival. "I didn't know who I was without pressure," she said once. "Now I'm learning." So was I. Our parents aged in ways that softened them. They no longer tried to guide every decision. They asked instead, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes beautifully. When they visited, the house felt warmer, not because everything was fixed, but because nothing was hidden anymore. One evening, sitting together after dinner, my mother looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Not fear, not guilt, just presence. "I wish we had trusted you sooner," she said. "I wish you had trusted yourselves," I replied. It wasn't an accusation. It was an understanding. There were moments when grief resurfaced unexpectedly. Birthdays, quiet mornings, random songs on the radio. I learned to let those moments exist without trying to solve them. Loss didn't need closure. It needed space. As time passed, I began telling my story more openly, not dramatically, not as a confession, just as truth. People listened. Some saw themselves in it. Others simply heard it. And that was enough. One night, after sharing my story with someone who had never known me before, they asked a simple question: "Do you ever wish you hadn't found out?" I thought about it carefully, about the confusion, the pain, the years of unraveling. "No," I said, "because not knowing kept me small. Knowing taught me how to choose." That was the difference. Choice. I wasn't living the life that had been planned for me. I was living the one I had claimed. And in that claiming, I found something I hadn't known I was missing: peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of self-trust. The story didn't end there. Stories never do, but the weight of it changed. It became something I carried with intention instead of something that carried me. I stopped waiting for permission to belong. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I stopped confusing endurance with love. One afternoon, standing alone in my kitchen, sunlight spilling across the floor, I felt something settle inside me completely. I was no longer defined by the family I was born into, nor by the one that raised me. I was defined by the person I chose to become when I finally knew the truth. And that choice, repeated every day, became the most honest form of love I had ever known. The strange thing about healing is that you don't notice it happening. One day you wake up and realize the memories no longer sting the way they used to. They still exist, still matter, but they no longer control the way you breathe. That realization came to me quietly, on an ordinary morning while I was standing in line for coffee, listening to strangers talk about their lives. I wasn't triggered by their laughter. I wasn't comparing myself to their confidence. I was just there, present, whole. That was when I understood something important. My story had stopped being something I was reacting to. It had become something I was living with intention. Claire called me later that day. Her voice sounded lighter than it used to. "I'm thinking about starting over," she said. "Not running, not escaping, just choosing." I smiled. "That sounds like you." She laughed softly.
It sounds like you, actually. I think I learned it from watching you. For a long time, I had believed I was the shadow to her spotlight, the quiet sibling, the one who stayed behind. But now I realized something neither of us had seen clearly before. We had both been trapped by expectations. Mine just looked like silence instead of success. Our parents visited a few months later. We walked together through a park near my home, leaves crunching beneath our feet. My father moved slower now. My mother held his arm instinctively. I used to think parenting was about control, about protecting you from pain. And now, I asked? And now I think it's about trusting you to survive it. Those words healed something deep inside me, not because they were perfect, but because they were honest. That night, after they left, I sat alone with the windows open, the city breathing around me. I thought about the version of myself who had once believed strength meant never asking for more, who thought love had to be earned through endurance, who accepted imbalance because it felt familiar. I wished I could go back and sit beside that person. I wish I could tell them that one day they would stop shrinking themselves to fit inside other people's fears. But life doesn't let us go back. It only lets us carry what we've learned forward. Years later, when someone new entered my life and asked about my family, I didn't hesitate. I told the truth. Not dramatically, not defensively, just plainly. "This is who I am," I said. "This is where I come from." They nodded and stayed. That was when I knew I had finally broken the cycle. Secrets lose their power when they're spoken. Fear loosens its grip when it's named, and love becomes lighter when it's no longer carrying lies. I didn't become extraordinary. I didn't need to. I became honest, and that changed everything. Because at the end of the day, the story was never about money. It was never about a trust fund. It was never even about biology. It was about being seen. It was about being chosen, and finally learning how to choose myself. And if there's one thing I know now, it's this. You don't need to know where you belong to start living fully. You just need the courage to stop hiding from the truth. That courage saved my life. And if this story touched even a small part of your heart, if it reminded you of your own family, your own silence, your own hidden strength, then don't let it end here. Because stories like this are not just stories. They are pieces of real lives, real pain, real healing. And somewhere out there, someone needs to hear this the way you just did. So please, like this video to help this story reach more hearts. Share it with someone who might be feeling unseen. And subscribe to the channel because many more stories like this are coming. Stories about truth, about family, about becoming whole. Your support is what keeps these voices alive. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying till the end. And thank you for being part of this journey.